I hope you guys are ready for a lot of information really fast, because I would like to proselytize about the power of landscape architecture, the power of a small team, and we're urban designers, landscape architects, 25. At the moment, we're at the Wiltern building. Most people have been trained in landscape architecture and urban design, and we actually, although we do work elsewhere, we really have been focused in Southern California. And that is in part our values, and you know, sort of as a leader of the firm, I really believe in community and building community, and I started with my children's public schools and my neighborhood and planting trees, and then I ended up meeting this guy, and that is Lewis McAdams, the poet, who used to live in Berkeley, moved down here to be a teacher at a private school that actually ended up yielding us a new mayor, as in and Mayor Garcetti was his student. And Lewis was the guy who came down and said, holy cow, there's a river here, and why do we disrespect it so much? And there was, at the time, a regime of actually, basically in the late fall, of cutting down all the vegetation within the riverbed that existed in order to prevent flooding, which is why this river was built. So I'm going to tell you the story about the river, why it was channelized, and where we are, you know, what are some of the ways that as landscape architects we address these projects, and where we are today. Because although, how many of you have been to the LA River? Whoa, whoa, that's pretty good. On your own or with a class? With a class? On your own? Wow, that's great. That means people, you know, the word is out. So let me see if I can go. So, you know, this is, we're making some progress. So the first step quickly was that Lewis got all the environmental activists from in the 1980s to sort of help him convince the Army Corps that they should try not tearing down the river vegetation 1 year to see if there was really a flood. And as it turns out, even though the Army Corps is a large organization and very set in their ways, they actually agreed to sort of do this test, and the rest is history. We have vegetation. Not all of it native, but it's there, and it makes, and certainly the habitat is very happy there. And you know, what we're trying to do is to really connect these urban watersheds to the vibrancy of a city. And you know, throughout history, people have settled along urban waterways and access routes for trade because they were access routes for trade, and as cities have grown and industries have relocated, opening opportunities for densification, we also have the opportunity to recalibrate that urban infrastructure. And as these industries have grown and left the cities, we're left with these sort of somewhat derelict lands. And here you see what we in Los Angeles call, you know, a big success, which was we were allowed to use the maintenance roads of the river as basically bicycle routes. And at one point, in terms of, you know, all the sort of goals that we've had and the openness on the part of many of the agencies, but also the community and the environmental community that really became incredibly active and incredibly well positioned itself to really make a difference in terms of policy and in terms of sort of from a sort of political perspective. So at one point in the last 3 years, the decision was made, and after the river was declared navigable, to allow kayaks in the river as a test also. So the Los Angeles River and the recalibration of this infrastructure, and this is what it looks like still today. And the opportunity that as landscape architects we have is in, you know, our perspective, our lens, is to look at really the layers and designing with nature and understanding that we're not just dealing with the river or parks, but we're also dealing with the water and transportation, land use, people, and the environment. And this is kind of a little drawing we did associated with Raynham Banham's book, because I was asked to speak at MoCA at one point. And one of the things I realized in looking at his work was that he never had a perspective. As much as he loved Los Angeles, he didn't see the sky. That in all his documentaries, the sky was basically gray. It wasn't blue. And so one of the things that I can tell you is that as troublesome and big as this region is, and as big as the problems seem, that the fact that we now have blue sky, that the world looks at us as a place, a destination, because we have such a beautiful climate, is a result of policies that changed the way we dealt with air quality. And that's significant and something that we need to celebrate. So, it's really hard to speak of Los Angeles as a city. It's really a megalopolis, and so we deal with the city of 4 million now. It's like official. We have the metropolitan area is 18 million, and really, in terms of sort of just the impact on the environment, we're talking about the 24 million people. So this is, a fact. So when we're dealing with water and resiliency planning, those are issues that we need to address. So we all know, you're all studying cities, you're studying planning now, that in 2050, 75% of the population of the world is going to be in cities. And of course, we have this amazing state where we're just there's so much creativity, and basically nobody understands us on the East, but we're doing our best, and we're doing really well, and all of you are going to be contributing even more to this amazing region. And yet, when it comes to design and the way we deal with design and the way we deal with certain issues, this is the back of one of the most famous icons in the world. It's the Hollywood sign, and this is really what it looks like now. So, it's this lack of respect in some ways for design and infrastructure that keeps me and our firm going. So this is actually a beautiful Stegner quote, and working in California with lack of certain constraints does give us that sort of energetic sort of approach. Just to lay down some of the realities, the fires that have accosted our region that are very, very difficult now to deal with because of the way we've urbanized the state. The fact that 70% of our water supplies are in the north, but the largest population density is in the south, and so the demand, there's 80% of the demand is in the south, and how we spend a tremendous amount of energy, meaning sort of energy just moving water around, and how Los Angeles depends on 89% of our water comes from external resources. So we've managed to sort of work our way out of being much more sort of disciplined about how we use water as communities, as people, as residents. But in came the student of that guy, and he basically more recently executed an executive order. We are in a drought, it's real, we're not pretending, so at least he recognizes that, and that we're trying to reduce our per capita potable water use by 20% by 2017. So I guess all of us should be thinking about how we're addressing that. And then the Department of Water and Power is hoping to purchase 50% less water, So we need to have an integrated water strategy and deal with our local water supply in a, and improve our water security. So you'll hear the term that, so you've heard how many of you have heard the terms resiliency before? Great. So one of the new terms about addressing water and how we address water is basically one water, and I'll explain that momentarily. But, managing the drought is definitely, it's a real fact, and any of you who have not been out to Owens Valley should go out to Owens Valley, and it's right there. Of course, how that impacts food and food for our sustenance is a reality. And this is the aqueduct that travels, makes a lot of our water come 373 miles to our region. One of the big environmental problems that Owens Valley created, because the lake became about 1/100th of the size that it was originally, and it was an area geologically that's very rich in minerals. It caused a tremendous public health issue for the communities around, but also the actual particles that come out of Owens Valley with the wind actually have reached Japan. So it was only after years of sort of international sort of recognition of the issue that the federal government imposed a certain level of responsibility on the Department of Water and Power, who had the foresight of buying all this land so that we would have water in Southern California. Now they have to fix it. So fixing that is a big factor and something that is being addressed. That's not beautiful. That's not healthy water, just so it looks red because it's basically a tremendous amount of boron in what they call the brine pool. So as I said, water is a precious and a finite resource, and how we are going to address it. So this is not a term we've come up with. This is many of the water agencies across the country get together every year. Everybody's recognizing, even in the parts of the country on the east where there is too much water, that how you manage water is something that we need to address, and managing it in a holistic way is really important. So addressing aquifers and groundwater as well as reclaiming water, reusing water are all sort of part of the series of elements of this agenda that need to be addressed. So we can no longer think of addressing problems in our cities by thinking of water as one thing, transportation as another, land use as another issue, a layer, energy and public health, but instead we really have to be working on all these agendas. And the beauty of landscape architecture or graphics, a firm that does graphics, is that we try to really understand what that means. So hopefully these kinds of graphics help you understand about how this interconnected sort of series of solutions can create, multi-beneficial solutions to make us to secure sustainable economic and industrial development. So the effort, some of the major efforts of the master plan and the work on the river started in about 1985. There you see that image I showed you up at the top left, originally with Lewis McAdams, there in the bulldozers. And then as we moved along, the EPA had come up with a series of regulations about water quality. It was telling cities that by 2010 they had to come deliver a certain quality of water to the ocean. And in order to do that, they had some options. They could decide to do single-purpose solutions by putting filters at the ends of water, the water delivery system, or potentially do it with a more in a more creative way, and that is to look at parks and look at other urban solutions to actually accept water and deliver water in a very different way into the waterways that was already clean. So, as a result of many economic factors, the regulations made a lot of cities get their act together to do master plans, and because we had in Los Angeles Ed Reyes, who was a councilman and a planner, graduated from UCLA, as well as an activist like Louis McAdams, but also certainly people within the planning department, within the water department, even the Army Corps of Engineers, the notion that we had to actually produce a master plan in order to have an idea on how to move forward and have a vision of the future for the river. There was then a request for proposal so that we could develop a strategy, a plan that would be accepted by most of the city family. And I just think it's a little factor, but a big factor is we only dealt with 32 miles, but the river is 51 miles. And why? Because the elected officials couldn't get on the same page. And the mayor of Los Angeles somehow couldn't get the county supervisors and the 8 other mayors to come on the same page to actually do a plan together. So this is what happened in 1941, and this is why the river was channelized. It was definitely the Army Corps' intention to protect the citizens, and that was, that is their goal. And up on the left, you see the model that they made as they were making sure that that's how the river, how the river would function. At what point would it be a 300-foot channel? At what point would it narrow? How, the sides of the channel looked. It was amazing. I mean, if you think about it, it was a unusually sort of effective and beautiful piece of infrastructure. This concrete channel that protected millions of people and just got water effectively and efficiently from the north to the south and allowed this city to flourish. And for all of you who may or may not know, this used, the area along the LA River near downtown, which is what this is, was this verdant agricultural valley. This is the river getting built under the Flood Control Act of 1936. This is, the river across the whole LA basin. The master plan goals were to revitalize the river, to green the neighborhoods, to create value, and to capture community opportunities. So it was all about water and water quality and storage for flood protection, because that was important. But the realization that there was an opportunity for us to connect to neighborhoods, to create more open space, to actually create connections between the east and the west side of the river was really important. So the little model I showed when they were modeling the river originally was that little end of Canoga Park High School. So this is the birthplace of the LA River, by the way, I mean, in the urban area. So here you see, it's where it comes, and this is as it comes down towards the downtown and going around the curve. Here's Elysian Valley, it's past Griffith Park. This is when you show this image for people who don't know the place or the city, basically the freeways and the river are all one. And this is Tom LaBonge, one of our councilmen, taking a few people on a tour with us around the master plan, just getting down and dirty into the river. And this is our governor. One of the things that I always say is that by virtue of us being in Hollywood, people around the world think that what happens in LA is basically an example of good things. So, the fact that we showed this dirty channel, which is our river, as part of this sexy scene is a problem. So for a lot of you who are, planning, the jurisdictional complexity is absolutely a factor in any of the planning efforts that we go through. Want to say that one other major accomplishment, and it was led by people like Andy Lipkis from Tree People and others, including some senior people within the watershed division. When I first arrived on the scene, we did not do planning by watershed. We did planning by elected offices, like you see over on the left. But the river trespasses 5 council offices in 88 cities and the city of Los Angeles. I mean, 5 county supervisors, 8 council offices and all the mayors of the 88 cities that are in that area. So basically here you see the river and our freeways, and sort of on the left is work that we did to try to understand sort of the lack of access to parks, and everything in white are areas that are more than 20 minutes walking distance from a park, which is the norm at the national level. So the master plan effort, we actually did, we had several ways of sort of engaging in an 18-month period, not all the stakeholders, but the community also. And when we talk about stakeholders, we meant also all the agencies. We had to get buy-off on everything we did from the agencies, and it included, of course, the Army Corps being comfortable with us breaking down the concrete and starting to reimagine what that river would look like to allow for more water and cleaner water and access to people, and to have that be a part of our objective. So these are the ways we looked at this. We knew that there's, of course, a river network, that there was an existing open space network that we needed to actually really engage with and really grow and strengthen, and continue to think about how do we actually create what we called a district, a river district, and that didn't just include 150 feet on either side of the river, which was our contract was to deal with the border of the river, 150 feet on either side. So as consultants, we decided no, we were going to go out and make sure that it was inclusive of some natural geographic sort of factors, and that we really felt that there was a lot of change that had to happen along these communities, and you had to enlarge that area. So we enlarged the scope, not necessarily getting paid more for that, but just because it made the most sense, felt most responsible. So here you see sort of some of the results of, basically areas where we felt that there was an opportunity to really do major restoration efforts associated with the ecosystem, where we then could really deal with enhancing the water quality, and that could have meant a sort of LA Unified parking lot that was 25 acres with buses and asphalt sitting on them, to actually create areas where water could be captured and cleansed before it got to the river. And then areas like Piggyback that I'll show you in a minute, with a pink little area down here, which actually has much more potential than that. So this is the district as we dealt with it, and among the things we dealt with was trying to figure out how to actually break it down into neighborhoods. So it's easy to imagine 31 miles, but how do you break it down so it's actually human, and how that it relates to these communities in a way that the communities not only could behind the effort, but also support any policies and support votes in the future for funding to get projects that made sense for them and touched their lives. Among the things we did was we created, the master plan included a series of river typologies that addressed all the edges along the river and how to make it much more sort of walkable, much more human, how to integrate water quality aspects to every single project, and how to get people down to and into the river and create those opportunities for sort of a passive and active recreation. This is the level of detail that we got to when the projects, and of this there are obviously many, many pages in the document, and it is available online. But where we start breaking it down from a planning perspective, and you could see one thing that in the end really kind of bothered me is that we have the council districts identified. And the reason was because, unfortunately, in Los Angeles, even though a project might make sense for 5 council offices, the project will be sort of much more supported much more by the council that is gets the responsibility, and if an that and eventually the credit for the project. Just so you realize that this is obviously not just one firm, but the master plan actually was, there were many firms. Tetra Tech was the engineering firm. We had 2 other landscape architecture, urban design firms. We had an outreach firm and economic development group. And we dealt with all the city of Los Angeles, all of the county, state, and federal government agencies. We had these meetings going on constantly. And the master plan then eventually created a river office, which is now the River Works office, the River Corporation, which now exists, and an ongoing series of projects. So just so these are the issues you have to deal with. Whose property is what, and it gets pretty complicated along the way. Who manages the water, the maintenance, the flood protection, and what can we do? And these were the, some of the entities that government, that we sort of proposed to exist. And the JPA is sort of yet to happen. These are some of the images that we produced as part of the master to have people understand the opportunities. Behind a before and after like this are weeks and weeks of working with the Army Corps of Engineers and our engineers. In terms of what I learned was really one of the most important specialty, engineering specializations, which is fluvial geomorphology. That's figuring out how much water you need to actually move around here and still allow for planting and access, and what that all meant. So these were some of the major changes that we were proposing to these industrial areas as they reach the river. So everything from the streetscape as you reach the river, the whole neighborhood feel changing, having this whole district. Here you see actually this is a lot of development that you see in Elysian Valley, the train going through, and all those naysayers that say, well, rail's so important, us saying, well, infrastructure, people who design infrastructure can be very creative, and you could move under the rail and still access the river. So these were all sort of, as designers, these were, all the work we did associated with policy, with the reality check, associated with convincing the community that it didn't necessarily mean that, gentrification was coming or that their world was going to fall apart. Being able to do drawings like this and actually help people understand the future was really critical. So the timeline since the River Revitalization Master Plan. As I said, the corporation was formed. The EPA declared the LA River a traditionally navigable waterway. That means that doors were open for, and that's associated with the Clean Water Act, and that basically meant that there was additional funding for any future projects on the river. Then the LA River was chosen for the Federal Urban Watershed Pilot Program, so that meant some more funding. And eventually it received a HUD funding that I will share with you momentarily. And then wonderfully, there was also the Army Corps issues a recommendation for the LA River to do an ecosystem restoration study. And actually we have here one of the leaders of the from the Army Corps of Engineers, who's actually teaching at USC and a graduate of USC. So you'll all have to meet him, because he was kind of sort of my boss for some of this. So with that, I'll just take you through, again, this was in 2011, this program also allowed those kayaks to be deployed into the river. Then the LA River Ecosystem Restoration Study, which happened, I didn't realize, but it happened right around the time we were getting our plan adopted in 2007. And basically it was the Army Corps was preparing itself to understand, holy cow, this city really wants to change this waterway and this flood protection mechanism. What are we going to do? And how do we, what are some of the sort of tools that we have to allow for some of this to happen. So they were thinking of being really good partners, which they have been. And so this is the NELA, Northeast LA placemaking plan, which is basically a plan that involved a number of people from the Annenberg School, including George Villanueva. And here you see the initial work that we did. It was that HUD grant, and it really was thinking about how these communities would address their future as 5 communities that were really neighbors to this river and who were going to be really impacted in the future. And this was an opportunity to really think about workforce development and a food policy and a way of dealing with land use and mobility and economic development. And one of the efforts that we led, and Ben Feldman from my team is here, urban designer and landscape architect. We actually led part of this effort as we, over a 1-year period. And these were the sorts of, in the workshops, we wanted people to really share who they were and why they were interested in contributing to their community's future vision. And this was a sort of a way of having people understand how they got to the river. We were trying to, some people in those communities had never been to the river. So where do you go, first of all? Do you go, basically to a school? Where do you go to school? Where do you shop? Where do you get, how do you get to a clinic or some kind of health where do you get some medical attention? And then how do you get around? And we also took people, believe it or not, from a mile away to the river and got them in the bus, so we were all there together, really trying to understand. And of course, the weather collaborated with us, and they were able to see some of the issues and problems, including in one of the major cross streets where, we actually, in order to get in the bus, we were getting our feet wet because the flooding on some of these streets near the river is an issue. Again, really working with them in a three-dimensional, with the three-dimensional sort of tools to help them understand what does gentrification mean, how much are we going to be sort of promoting sort of more density, and what does it mean to you, to your community, to the next generation. And we ended up proposing a series of projects that really, everything from connectivity and through trails to actually, believe it or not, there isn't in, for example, Frogtown, one food store, one clinic, or for that matter, there's only not one restaurant either. So a lot of sort of issues to address in this area. So where that's at, that's that the project was completed, and it sits with the planning department because it was a collaborative with HUD. So it included several consultants and nonprofits all participating together in the planning department. But if at any one point we could come and present that project, I think it has a lot more sort of meat to it, and it's very interesting on how to take a large master plan that has been adopted as policy by the city of Los Angeles, where HUD helps to actually drill down and what that means to 5 communities in that area, and some of the policies and funding that can come forward associated with that. So one of the things that we realized and that the community was very adamant about during the master plan was that we can't get to the other side. There hadn't been any pedestrian bridges built, and this, believe it or not, there's a community with 4,000 equestrians on the east side of the river. And it's right across from Griffith Park, and where the notion of actually starting to connect the river from across the way an analysis was done. This would be a great area to do a multimodal bridge, and there was a donor. So philanthropy is starting to sort of kick in the Los Angeles area beyond fancy, music halls. And so this was a wonderful, wonderful opportunity. He was given several options, and he chose this multimodal bridge. This is where it occurs, and the idea is to be able to get people from Griffith Park across to the Atwater area. You could see some of the equestrian facilities up in this area right in here. This is, of course, the 5 freeway right here. So this is the multimodal crossing. Here we're trying to deploy these water quality terraces that I showed you in some of these sections. So the idea is that before the water gets down into the river, we're cleaning the water through planting. And here is what this place in this bridge would look like. Another project, this is a Prop K, other funding project. It's ongoing. It was, it's about joining about 5 miles of stretches along the Studio City area. This is a Prop K project that's 12 years old. It took that long. I won't blame only the Army Corps, but for all these agencies to learn to work together and sort of resolve the issues they have, whether it's the county, the county is responsible for sort of the maintaining the river. The Army Corps has other major responsibilities, and the city is responsible for other aspects of the river. And so how to actually negotiate all of that so everybody does the green light and allows access into this maintenance area. So what we are connecting is 4 areas of the city with this series of walkways that turn what is now just a maintenance channel that some runners have discovered and really take advantage of, but which is the first step in the city actually accepting negotiating this area. And this is one of the areas where the governor was running through with his motorcycle. And eventually getting rid of all the invasives, including the eucalyptus, and actually connecting some of the residential areas to the river, but also some of the commercial areas, like around Studio City and the San Fernando Valley area. This is some already in construction. Again, we're talking 12 years, but negotiated, accepted, and moving forward. Some other ongoing interventions along the LA River, which include most of these were done associated with the Atwater's Art Day, sort of trying to really work with the community on opportunities. And so artists open up their studios, and this project was just helping people understand where all the artist studios were, doing a pop-up street end. And then finally, there are 2 projects that are ongoing. One is this rail yard, which actually was sort of what happens along this river is that those who are interested, including Lewis McAdams or the head of the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy, they go on a helicopter and they mine for properties, and they say, so this was Lewis, who had always thought, oh, what's that place? And it's 125 acres, a stone's throw away from City Hall, from Union Station, which is basically a rail yard that is relatively underutilized in our minds, although certainly the rail spurs are very important. They allow for all this merchandise to move across the country, but the parking, which is the 125 acres of asphalt, can be re-envisioned. So this is where, associated actually with the ecosystem restoration study, we actually came up with the idea that we could actually make sure that the water actually got collected, slowed down, and that we actually used parks and developed the edges of this area right in here, associated with the USC Medical Center that is already on the side, connected east and west, connected ourselves to Union Station, and created this new major district for Los Angeles. So this is the piggy backyard. We will call to action by Lewis McAdams. 5 firms, including Perkins and Will, actually worked on this for a year. We had meetings every Friday afternoon, and we just plugged away trying to figure out if this had viability. Eventually, it did become an actual sort of consulting opportunity for us, and it was this is a project that has a future, not right away, but because we have to get the rail companies, Union Pacific, to sort of play with the city. So obviously we could deploy all the one water strategies that one could ever imagine on this project and really create like a model for the city on how to recalibrate a site along the LA River and have a new way and allow for density, allow for parks that actually can be managed during flood seasons, and to really create a new type of district along the river. Finally is the Union Station Master Plan. It's actually happened to be an ongoing project that came into our office 3 years ago with a number of other firms. When we first started the project, reminding people that the river was, a neighbor was something that was not very welcome. Eventually, and during the master planning effort, the city actually bought the MTA, on behalf of the citizens, actually bought the site where Union Station sits. And all of a sudden, there was an interest in the river and the opportunities that exist, although several big buildings, including Piper Tech, have to come down, which is where they store all the paper files for a lot of the departments in the city of Los Angeles. But we figured the river should take priority. The idea with the master plan is really to actually, again, have a series, to have a lot more density around the station. The station becomes more of a cultural sort of a commercial destination with restaurants and other facilities, and the functioning of the transportation system, which no longer can really be put into play in such a small facility, actually moves to the middle of the site, allowing for the future high-speed rail to also engage. And among the things that we really worked hard on is to make sure that we brought La Alameda back to Alameda. And that means multiple rows of trees, and of course the front of the station no longer parking because everybody's going to be on foot, on bikes, or on public transportation. Allowing for us to understand how we get up and over the high-speed rail lines, and to how to live, work, and play in one of these new districts. How we address water, and it's a very interesting new sets of technologies and allowing water to sort of capture water and detain it, but there's also policies that actually that are part of the low-income development ordinance and more that we have to deploy in a project like this. And here you see sort of that Alameda coming back, 2 rows of trees. We're fighting hard, got to fight hard for the urban forest, and allowing for this future. The mayor has focused on great streets. Well, let's see if the Department of Transportation and the Planning Department and others really sort of come to the table with funding and also acceptance of some of these strategies. And finally, the Arbor study, and I think all of you, basically what the Army Corps did in their ecosystem restoration study was to try to help us understand what their values were associated with the ecosystem, and then we were basically working back and forth because they would say, for example, that bringing people to the river was not part of the funding that the ecosystem restoration could actually employ. But we were, trying to work together to see how all those values could align for both the master plan, but also the ecosystem restoration. And with that, these are all these basically part of the ecosystem restoration study. And finally, Confluence Park, a park that we built about 10 years ago that actually is having to be rebuilt, associated with the with the new Figueroa Bridge. And where we are today, which is now it's no longer just a pop-up opportunity for kayaks, but it's actually happening every year, 5 months of the year. You can be in the river kayaking. You should all sign up. It's really fun, gives you a whole new perspective, and you have no sense of what's around you. It's really marvelous. And all the activities that are ongoing in the river associated with what does urban ecology really mean? How far back are we going to be able to go to actually bring the river back? But what is there here now, and how can we recalibrate and reassess how we live in the city, what the future is, and how we could all contribute to a better Los Angeles for the next generations. Thank you.
Thank you very much first for the invitation, and thank you very much to have the honor to have a discussion with Mia Lehrer. I think the lecture gave, for me, a really wonderful introduction to the LA River and to the work of Mia that I have seen from afar. And I think I'm going to get to know a lot better by being here. And actually, I'm going to coincidentally have a opportunity to see her work in person in her office on Friday. This invitation came a few days later. I think what's been really great is that Mia has, for us, been able to show, actually, in a very condensed lecture through the LA River, that landscape architecture, and particularly her work, is something that is essential, something that's really necessary for the city, that is actually about urbanism. It's nothing about beautification, but it's fundamental for the life of the city and for revival of the urban context. It's very much about politics. It's very much about planning, and it crosses architecture. It crosses the disciplines. And it obviously crosses scales. We know that the river is 51 miles. It crosses an incredible amount of jurisdictions, very complicated, needing quite a lot of negotiation. And the power of landscape architecture is that it includes research, design, and must negotiate policy. And I think what the projects have shown is that it requires incredibly bold vision, but then the down and dirty negotiation through workshops and being able actually to implement projects. But also I think it raises really fundamental questions between things that we used to see as paradoxical and oppositional, between what is nature and what is culture, and between what is landscape and what is city. When we think about a river, I don't think we think about the Los Angeles River being something in a concrete encasement. As was said in the introduction, I'm very new to Los Angeles. But most of my research in the last 20 years, at least, has been about water. And certainly the Los Angeles River is not a typical one. Knowing also that a city that has a population of 14 million is in a drought and is going to be urbanizing even more and more. The projected populations are incredibly alarming. I think the whole issue of what is the future of the LA River is something that needs incredible thought. So I think the lecture has been very interesting in bringing up the whole notion of resilience, For me, it also raises questions when we're in one of the biggest moments of drought. Talking about this institutional complexity, which probably is not going to be reducing, knowing governments, knowing the American government, the way things look like they're progressing. I think part of the power of design is also creating new stakeholder coalitions. I think the power of images, being able to create visions and clarity in visual representation, showing possible synergies that people didn't imagine was possible, is part of what is the responsibility of design and working together across disciplines. Recognize the importance of people like fluviogeomorphologists, knowing that we don't know it all and knowing who you have to ask to work. So maybe to start off, I would like to start with a question and then open the floor to all of the students, because I think you're the future also. But for me, one question I would like to maybe start with for Mia. Again, part of it comes from ignorance, because I don't know so well the LA River. But when it comes to understanding from afar that the LA River is, on the one hand, very far away from what I recognize naively as a river, but on the other hand, reading a little bit to prepare myself for looking at this, I understand in many cases it's more a river than it ever has been, to a certain degree, because it has in certain instances more water than it had in its as found condition, because it has now wastewater, stormwater, but at the same time with the climate change predictions, it has also, we're going to have probably more drought. We're going to have more urban population. So there's going to be more claims for needing to recycle water. So there'll probably be less water that will actually make it into this, potentially make it into the channel, because there'll be more water that will need to be recycled, potentially. What is the future of the channel in terms of flow? The one question. Mm-hmm. Another question, I mean, it's all tied into this new nature culture, city. If we think of this as a new urban infrastructure in the city, and also knowing the writing of people like Peter Del Tredici, talking of new plants, the new invasive species that come that start to have their own ecologies. Why do we still need to think of clearing invasive species from areas when perhaps they can start to become part of the new urban ecology in the new thinking of a new urban ecology? And finally, what do you think in this revitalization idea of this concrete channel itself in relation to part of a layering of a history, and the way to take that as part of something we go with into the future?
Few questions. I didn't have papers, so I had to do it the old-fashioned way. The water, and sort of where's the water going to be coming from to go into the river? You're absolutely right. The majority of the water that's in the river is reclaimed water. We actually have 3 major reclamation plants. The one that's at the end of the river actually throws, the biggest plant, which is the one at Hyperion, throws its water a mile into the ocean. That has to be reversed. The way we see it right now is that the reclaimed water is probably going to continue being available, except it's going to go through many more recycling moments. So it's going to recycle where it's recycling, and then there's going to be vessels to hold it for a long period of time. So one potential vessel is, there are several reservoirs that are no longer in use, or several areas like Piggyback where you could actually hold water. Those areas are going to hold water to allow it to get into the aquifer, because right now we're not using all our aquifer water as much as we could, partly because of contamination, but partly because our aquifers are really low, because we have so much impervious surface. So once we get less impervious surface, we take care of our aquifers to collect the water below grade. We slow down the water so that it's, we use it and reuse it for parks or for micro neighborhoods. We end up being able to reuse our water 3 or 4 times. We're not using gray water enough. We're actually, I have this vision that we're going to densify, and then we're going to have basically areas around these new villages where water gets collected from these neighborhoods. Get parks, you get potentially food, and you're connected via roads that are actually now much narrower because we have public transportation, and you have forests along them. So there is this, opportunity to be thinking about water and the way we use water, and maybe we don't take showers every day. Maybe we're going back to some other, the way some of us grew up, actually, because I grew up in the tropics, and so there are ways that individuals can change, but there's going to be new technologies, and we're going to be able to sort of figure it out. Desalinization is the last result, but it's definitely being considered in a very serious way. It's funny that so I think that takes care of water, yes?
But it has to be part of a much bigger water plan. That's
there
not
is,
just,
yes.
Okay.
And so this is not, it's presumptuous for me to, there is a big effort ongoing. No. Landscape architects are involved through the sanitation department in a series of conferences, small conferences that are going on, where they're bringing together multidisciplinary teams. They're called palapas. So you think you're going on vacation, but you're really not. And you go to the Hyperion plant for a day, and there's these ongoing conversations. There's one they're happening about 4 a year, trying to figure out strategies that all the different departments, whether it's stormwater management, street trees, sanitation, urban design, planning, how they're all working together to do the water system. We have a really sophisticated group of engineers that are, whether it's in the Department of Water and Power or in the Bureau of Engineering Sanitation, they are really working together. The silos have been sort of broken. So it is awesome to see how the county and the city are working together. And of course, now there's mandates from the governor. That helps when you get mandated, it's like you have to deal with it. So there's a lot of that conversation and strategy going on. And stay tuned with what that will mean, because it'll mean things at different stages. As far as concrete and the history, that was the last. I actually love parts of the river concrete. I mean, it makes me happy. Like when I go into one of those awesome, areas that is wide, especially in the downtown area, there's something about it that is so amazing, and especially with the bridges in the distance. But it will never all go away, but it will change. But the fact is that in many areas, like if you look at the area between Atwater and, let's say, First Street, the concrete is spoiling. It's actually coming up. So there is not a choice. You have to do something. And if we're, you know, if the way we're thinking about it, it won't be a one solution. If an area like Piggyback, where there's space to move, you know, retreat back from the river's edge, you break down the river there, and, you know, we can go back to one of those images while I continue talking, but it's, oh, no, that's not going to happen. Okay. There'll be water quality terraces in some areas that allow you to, you know, pull back, and then allow for, you know, the water to sort of, it'll still be a constructed solution. And then in areas like the Piggyback, you'll take down only one side of the concrete and then have islands, armored islands that slow water down, bring it in, floods in certain situations, then, you know, kicks out. So there's multiple levels of solutions. As what we do know is that we're going to have the appetite on the part of the appetite on the part of the politicians is going to have to exist to actually you know, allow for some of the industrial areas to actually be kicked back and to allow for the river to have more space to control that water. Then as far as urban ecology, funny, one of the reasons I actually have to leave is because we're very involved in the notion of a series of nurseries to figure out what the future sources of plant material are going to be across all these projects. There's going to be thousands of acres in the next 10 years of new sites with parks, and the question is what will they look like and what will be in them. And obviously ecologists and naturalists and biologists who all want to go back to the original, what was there originally, but the fact is the birds have thrived in the Long Beach, what we call styrofoam wetlands. Wetlands filled with styrofoam. And, you know, they know not to eat the styrofoam, and they have thrived there. And so it's a very important question. We want to clean the styrofoam and the plastic. And, you know, we did regulate no more plastic bags in Los Angeles. So, you know, there are some invasives that have some issues, but by and large, you're right. What we don't want to do is to continue planting invasives, but not necessarily take out the invasives. But what we do know is that the commercial nurseries that have been growing certain plant material only grow what they think is going to thrive and what they can sell fast. So that's, you know, it's an ongoing but important conversation.
I live in a neighborhood in Sherman Oaks where the river goes through, but the access roads are not open to the public. And so I'm curious about how kind of the connecting is happening. You had the graphic up where there were plans for that, but kind of is it based on those council members, or how does the plan kind of unfold?
It's based on you going to your councilmen. I mean, we're doing what the funding, you know, the funding that exists is for the edges. And we'll end up with 2 or 3 community meetings for each of those projects. And if people don't show up who care or who bring something like that up, you know, I just become, you know, a difficult consultant. And we try to do that, and we try to engage and communicate and make sure. But part of the reason that project took 11 years was because the council person from that office from that area wasn't that interested. So we did the original planning. And then the money for Prop K was sitting in an account, and nobody was rattling the cage. So I will say to all of you is I hope you're voting whenever you can vote. And because Los Angeles has one of the lowest voting records in the state, in the country. So it's really embarrassing when we're all out there. And it makes a difference. And I would also say get involved. And it's not necessarily your neighborhood councils, because that's a whole other story, but go to your council, write a note, you know, stay engaged so you understand the process given what you're studying. So somebody else there had a question?
Yeah, so you were talking about sort of navigating the different like political actors, and I know that like, you know, the movie industry does use the LA River for those shots. So can you talk a little bit more about sort of navigating that stakeholder group as well?
Which? I didn't understand.
Entertainment industry, because they use the LA River for like.
They use it and they get a permit, and they pay the city probably not enough. You know, the city needs to become probably a little bit more savvy about how much money, because maybe we could pay for more of these LA River projects. If you're in the LA River, you give us a % of sales on, you know, Terminator, and we're all set. But you know, it doesn't. You know, actually, the city is working really hard on keeping some of the movie industry continuing to do these. You know, do filming. In the winter, it's harder. They can't get a permit because of the water. But in the summer, it's basically you often see them down there. So I think that answers your question. Anybody else?
Have you guys had any success communicating with the owners of the property? I know they, last I checked, they're set on keeping it and not selling it because it's worth so much.
Yeah, so that's the thing. It's not because they need it, it's worth so much. Yeah. So you know what, it happens in other parts of it's happened in other parts of the country, like in Denver and other places. So it's about aligning the stars, it's about the political vision and leadership. And again, the fact that it was included in the ecosystem restoration study, we were waiting as consultants there for the shoe to drop and the Army Corps and Union Pacific to sue somebody. Like, how dare you plant on our site? So you know, it's complicated, and it's not advanced too much, but there's a lot. I mean, eventually, a site like that is gonna change. The question is when. And again, all of you are in the school, and because you're interested in these kinds of issues, just stay engaged. But I think actually, Ben Feldman, who's here, is really spent a lot of time on the piggyback. And if anybody has any more questions or want to stay tuned, maybe you could have a LinkedIn sort of conversation or talk to him. But it's pretty exciting, though. I mean, for us to go from a volunteer effort as a team to end up in a project that has legs, and so basically, we call it guerrilla planning, and it takes a certain commitment to the bottom line. You're not always necessarily making profit in the way, so that some firms want to always, you know, yield profits at the end. In our case, it's about staying engaged with the city and trying to make projects like this happen.
From my understanding, the concrete channel, always think about is not very ecological, you know, especially to cut down the ecological system from the river to the outside, or some land, or some levels. So I was wondering, does this LA River revitalization plan use some specific or special strategies to, you know, how do I say it, to reuse or change the concrete channel to some other forms? Or
yeah, I think I showed the water quality terraces. So the concrete comes out, and we then use these planter beds that actually keep the water back, but actually, you know, basically do planting. So, and whether some of that concrete will be porous or how it will come together, there's at the piggyback yard, we used armor, a certain kind of armor that's also permeable for the islands. So there's a lot of new technologies that would be deployed. You still have to keep people safe. And you still have to keep the businesses and the residents, you know, in their homes and industries. So, yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. And Ben is here if any of you are too shy to ask questions.